She would a human for peace, then watched him fight like a war god. Before we dive into this story, drop a quick hi in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. It really helps support the channel. Ambassador Lyra Nessari stood before the ornate mirror in her private chamber, her iridescent skin reflecting the soft purple light of her homeworld, Celastra. In just 1 hour, she would be married to a human she had never met, all for the sake of peace between their species. The war between humans and Celestrians had raged for 7 years. 7 long, bitter years of death, destruction, and hatred. Now, the human government had proposed an unorthodox solution, a marriage alliance between a high-ranking Celestrian and a human warrior. As the daughter of Grand Sovereign Eli Star, the supreme ruler of Celastra, Lyra had been the obvious choice. "Your Eminence," called a soft voice from the doorway. "The human delegation has arrived." Lyra's four-fingered hands trembled slightly as she adjusted the ceremonial headdress of spun crystal that crowned her pale blue hair. The elaborate garment caught the light, sending rainbow patterns dancing across the walls of her chamber. "Thank you, Telia. I will be there shortly," she replied, her voice steady despite the storm of emotions raging within her. The peace treaty hinged on this marriage. Her people needed this alliance. Celestrians were intellectually and technologically superior to humans in many ways, but the humans had proven themselves to be ferocious fighters, unpredictable and relentless in battle. Their military campaign had pushed the Celestrian forces to their breaking point. As Lyra made her way through the crystal corridors of the palace, she steeled herself for what was to come. She had studied human culture extensively in preparation for this day, but knowledge gleaned from data files was vastly different from facing the reality of binding herself to an alien being for life. The Great Hall was filled with Celestrian nobles, their translucent skin displaying various shades of blue, violet, and green emotion patterns. The atmosphere was tense, a mixture of hope for peace and disgust at the prospect of one of their own being given to a human. Lyra kept her head high as she entered, ignoring the murmurs that followed her procession. And then she saw him. The human stood at the far end of the hall, flanked by a small delegation of his kind. He was taller than she had expected, with broad shoulders and a stance that spoke of contained power. His skin was a warm brown, so different from the cool-toned translucence of her people. Dark hair was cropped close to his skull in what she recognized as a military style. His eyes, a shade of green that reminded her of the rare copper forests of Celastra's southern continent, met hers across the expanse of the hall. "Ambassador Nessari," announced the royal herald, "may I present Captain Blake Turner of the Human Galactic Forces, your intended." Blake Turner bowed deeply in the Celestrian fashion, a gesture that surprised Lyra. It appeared he had also been studying her culture. His movements were precise and respectful, though she could detect a slight stiffness that betrayed his military background. The Celestrian high priest stepped forward to begin the ceremony, his ancient voice carrying through the hall with surprising strength. "Today marks the end of bloodshed and the beginning of understanding between our peoples. Through the sacred union of Ambassador Lyra Nessari and Captain Blake Turner, we forge a bond stronger than treaties, more enduring than promises." Lyra approached the ceremonial platform, her steps measured and graceful despite her inner turmoil. Captain Turner moved forward as well, his gait confident but controlled. Up close, she could see small scars on his face and hands, evidence of the war that had brought them together in this strange circumstance. The ceremony was a blend of both cultures' traditions, a symbolic first step toward the integration their peoples would now begin. Lyra spoke her vows in perfect English, having practiced for weeks to master the harsh sounds of the human language. Captain Turner surprised her again by responding in halting but understandable Celestrian, the liquid syllables sounding strange but sincere from his human vocal cords. When they joined hands to complete the ritual, Lyra felt a jolt of surprise at the warmth of his skin against hers. Humans ran several degrees hotter than Celestrians, and the contact was shocking but not unpleasant. His hand engulfed her smaller one, calloused palms against her smooth skin. "With this union, let there be peace," intoned the high priest, binding their hands together with a ribbon of crystalline material that would dissolve over the next 7 days, symbolizing the gradual merging of their separate lives into one shared path. "Peace." echoed the assembled guests, though Lyra noted that the words sounded more like a question than a declaration from many of the human delegation. The reception that followed was a stilted affair, with humans and Celestrians keeping largely to themselves despite the supposed significance of the day. Lyra found herself standing beside her new husband, acutely aware of his alien presence. "You speak our language well," she said finally, breaking the uncomfortable silence between them. "Thank you, Ambassador," he replied in English. "I've been studying since I was chosen for this assignment. Your mastery of English is impressive." "This isn't an assignment, Captain Turner," she corrected gently. "It is a lifelong commitment." Something flickered in his eyes, resignation, perhaps, or determination. "Of course. And please, call me Blake. It seems overly formal to use titles when we're now married." "Blake." She tested the name, finding the single syllable abrupt but not unpleasant on her tongue. "And I am Lyra." He nodded, a small smile softening his features slightly. It was the first time she had seen him express anything other than solemn duty, and the change was remarkable, transforming his face from stern to almost approachable. "Lyra," he said, and the way he pronounced the two syllables made it sound like music. "A beautiful name. It means a musical instrument in one of our ancient languages." "Really?" she asked, genuinely surprised. "In our tongue, it refers to the patterns of light that dance across our southern ice shelf during the winter season." This small moment of cultural exchange felt more meaningful than the elaborate ceremony they had just completed. For a brief instant, they were not representatives of their species, but simply two individuals learning about each other. The moment was shattered by the approach of General Darius Kellen, the highest-ranking human military officer present. "Captain Turner," he said, his tone formal, but with an undercurrent of disapproval. "A word, if I may." "Of course, General," Blake replied, his posture automatically stiffening to attention. He turned to Lyra. "Please excuse me, Ambassador, Lyra. I will return shortly." As he walked away with the general, Lyra observed the difference in their bearing. Both were military men, but while the general seemed to wear his authority like armor, Blake carried his strength with a quieter confidence. "He is not what I expected," came a voice at her side. Her father, Grand Sovereign Eli Star, had approached without her noticing, his ceremonial robes shimmering with embedded light crystals that signified his status. "What did you expect, father?" she asked, watching as Blake and the general engaged in what appeared to be a tense conversation across the room. "Something more brutish," her father admitted. "Humans have a reputation for violence and impulsivity. This one seems controlled, at least." "His name is Blake," Lyra said, surprising herself with the defensive note in her voice. "And he appears to be making an effort to respect our ways." Her father studied her for a moment, his skin shifting to a deeper blue that indicated thoughtfulness. "Remember why you are doing this, daughter. Your personal feelings toward the human are irrelevant. What matters is the security of our people." "I understand my duty," Lyra replied, her tone cooling. "I have always understood it." "Good," her father said, apparently satisfied. "Because there are many among both our peoples who oppose this union. You will need to be vigilant." With that cryptic warning, he glided away to speak with members of the Celestrian Council, leaving Lyra alone with her thoughts. Later that evening, as the twin moons of Celastra rose in the night sky, Lyra and Blake were escorted to their shared quarters in the diplomatic wing of the palace. The suite had been specially designed to accommodate both Celestrian and human needs, the ambient temperature a compromise between what each found comfortable, the furnishings a blend of the crystal formations preferred by Celestrians and the softer materials humans favored. An awkward silence fell as the attendants left them alone. Blake stood near the large viewing window, looking out at the crystalline spires of the capital city that glittered beneath the moonlight. "It's beautiful," he said finally. "Your world. I've only seen it from battle stations before." Lyra moved to stand beside him, careful to maintain a respectful distance. "I hope you will come to appreciate its beauty beyond the strategic value." He turned to face her, his expression serious. "I want you to know that I am committed to making this work. The peace, I mean, and this arrangement." "As am I," Lyra replied. "Though I admit I have concerns about how we will proceed." "We have that in common then," Blake said, a hint of wry humor in his voice. I suggest we approach this like any diplomatic mission. First step, establishing parameters and understanding expectations. Lyra found herself appreciating his practical approach. Very well. In Celestrian culture, marriages are typically partnerships of shared purpose rather than romantic entanglements. Given the circumstances, I believe we can function effectively as diplomatic representatives of our respective species. Blake nodded. That's similar to certain human cultural traditions. We can build a working relationship focused on our shared goal of maintaining peace. Exactly, Lyra said, relieved that he understood. We need not concern ourselves with the more intimate aspects that some human marriages entail. A slight flush colored Blake's cheeks, the first sign of discomfort he had displayed all day. Right? Of course. I would never presume. Then we are in agreement, Lyra said quickly. We will present a united front to both our peoples while working together to strengthen the alliance. A united front, Blake repeated, extending his hand in what she recognized as a human gesture to seal an agreement. Partners in peace. Lyra placed her four-fingered hand in his five-fingered one, noting again the strange warmth of his skin. Partners in peace. As they stood there, silhouetted against the backdrop of the Celestrian night, neither could have predicted how severely that peace would be tested, or how their carefully negotiated partnership would transform in the crucible of coming events. The first 3 months of their marriage proceeded with surprising smoothness. Blake adapted to life on Celastra with a flexibility that impressed even the most skeptical Celestrian observers. He attended council meetings with Lyra, offering insights into human perspectives that proved valuable in crafting trade agreements and cultural exchange programs. In private, they established a comfortable routine, sharing meals and conversations that gradually evolved from stilted politeness to genuine intellectual exchange. Lyra found herself unexpectedly enjoying his company. Blake possessed a quick mind and a curiosity about Celestrian culture that seemed sincere rather than strategic. He asked thoughtful questions about their art, science, and philosophy, often drawing surprising parallels to human concepts. Your mathematical understanding of crystalline growth patterns is similar to our fractal theory, he commented one evening as they reviewed a scientific proposal for joint research. Though you've taken it in directions our scientists never considered. Perhaps because we live surrounded by crystal formations, Lyra suggested. Your people seem more focused on organic patterns. Product of our environment, Blake agreed. Speaking of which, I've been meaning to ask about these. He gestured to a collection of small crystal sculptures on a shelf in their shared living space. Lyra had created them over the years, a hobby few knew about. You made these, didn't you? The servants mentioned you're an artist. Lyra felt her skin flush slightly with pale pink, a Celestrian sign of embarrassment. Hardly an artist. It's merely a pastime. Blake rose and approached the shelf, examining a piece that resembled a spiral of frozen light. This is beautiful work. The way you've captured movement in something solid. He glanced back at her. You're too modest. On Earth, you'd be exhibited in galleries. His appreciation seemed genuine, and Lyra felt an unfamiliar warmth that had nothing to do with the room's temperature. Thank you. Perhaps someday I could show you the proper technique. Celestrian crystal singing is an ancient art form. I'd like that, Blake said, his smile reaching his eyes in a way that made them crinkle at the corners. Such moments of connection became more frequent as the weeks passed. Lyra began teaching Blake more nuanced aspects of Celestrian language and culture, while he shared human music, literature, and history with her. Their political partnership gained depth through personal understanding, exactly as the architects of their union had hoped. What no one had anticipated, however, was the growing opposition to the peace treaty. While the official stance of both governments remained supportive, factions on both sides viewed the alliance with suspicion and resentment. Human military hardliners considered it a surrender to an enemy they believed they could have defeated outright, while Celestrian purists saw it as a contamination of their society by inferior beings. The first serious incident occurred during a public appearance at the opening of a joint human-Celestrian scientific facility. As Blake and Lyra walked the crystalline pathway toward the entrance, a Celestrian male burst from the crowd, shouting ancient slurs against warmbloods and brandishing a ceremonial blade. Before the security forces could react, Blake moved with startling speed. He pushed Lyra aside and faced the attacker directly, his movements fluid and precise. The Celestrian lunged with the blade, but Blake sidestepped, caught the attacker's arm, and used his own momentum to throw him to the ground. The entire confrontation lasted less than 5 seconds. As security personnel swarmed around them, Lyra stared at her husband in shock. His face had transformed, all the warmth and thoughtfulness replaced by cold focus. In that moment, she had glimpsed the warrior beneath the diplomat. "Are you hurt?" Blake asked her, the hardness already fading from his expression as concern took its place. "No," Lyra replied, still processing what she had witnessed. "You move very quickly." Blake helped her to her feet, his touch gentle despite the display of strength moments before. Military training. Reaction becomes instinct after a while. The incident was quickly contained, with the assailant identified as a member of a fringe separatist group called the Pure Crystal Collective. Official statements minimized the attack, characterizing it as the isolated action of a disturbed individual. Privately, however, both human and Celestrian security forces increased their vigilance. That evening, Lyra found Blake in their quarters practicing what appeared to be a series of flowing movements, his body moving through positions with controlled power. He had removed his formal tunic, wearing only a light undershirt that revealed the muscled contours of his arms and shoulders. He stopped when he noticed her presence. "Sorry, I should have asked if this would disturb you. It helps me clear my mind after incidents." "It's fine," Lyra said, genuinely curious. "What is this practice?" "A martial art called Tai Chi," Blake explained, resuming a relaxed stance. "It originated as a fighting technique on Earth thousands of years ago, but evolved into a practice for balancing body and mind." "It looks peaceful," Lyra observed. "Unlike what I saw today." Blake's expression grew serious. "That was combat application, something I hoped I wouldn't need to use here. I'm sorry if it alarmed you." "You protected me," Lyra said simply. "That is not something to apologize for." A moment of understanding passed between them, deeper than any they had shared before. Blake inclined his head slightly in acknowledgement of her words. "Would you teach me?" Lyra asked suddenly. "Not for combat, but the balancing aspect you mentioned. Our philosophers speak of similar concepts." Surprise flashed across Blake's face, quickly followed by something that might have been pleasure. "Of course. It's traditionally meant to be shared." He gestured to the space beside him. "We can start with the basic form." As the moons rose outside their window, human and Celestrian moved in synchrony, one teaching, one learning, both discovering unexpected harmony in their differences. The following weeks brought increased security and heightened tension. Intelligence reports indicated growing coordination between anti-peace factions on both sides, though no specific threat had been identified. Despite the underlying anxiety, Blake and Lyra continued their diplomatic duties, presenting a united front that became increasingly less artificial as their personal connection deepened. "Your linguistic adaptation is remarkable," noted Professor Valen, a Celestrian cultural expert, as he observed Blake conversing fluently with council members at a diplomatic function. "Most humans struggle with the tonal aspects of our language, yet you've mastered even the regional dialects." "I had an excellent teacher," Blake replied, inclining his head toward Lyra. "And I've always had an ear for languages. It was part of my military specialty before I was selected for this assignment." Professor Valen's skin rippled with pale yellow curiosity. "What was your specialty, if I may ask?" "Our briefings on your background were surprisingly limited." Blake hesitated, and Lyra noticed a subtle shift in his posture, a guardedness that emerged whenever his military past was discussed directly. "Intelligence and special operations," he said finally, "primarily focused on understanding alien cultures and capabilities." "A spy, then," Valance said, his skin darkening slightly. "An analyst and cultural liaison," Blake corrected smoothly. "My job was to prevent conflicts through understanding, not to create them through deception." The professor seemed skeptical but let the matter drop. As he moved away to join another conversation, Lyra turned to Blake. "You never speak of your life before our marriage," she observed. 7 years of war, yet you share only general information about human culture, nothing personal." Blake's green eyes met hers, and for a moment, She glimpsed something haunted in their depths. Some memories are better left undisturbed, Lyra. For both our sakes. Before she could respond, they were interrupted by the arrival of Telia, now serving as Lyra's chief diplomatic aide. Your Eminence, Captain Turner, she said, her formal address acknowledging both their statuses. I apologize for the intrusion, but there's been a development that requires your immediate attention. Your presence is requested in the Secure Communication Center. The urgency in Telia's voice alerted Lyra that something significant had occurred. She and Blake excused themselves from the gathering and followed Telia through the palace corridors to the heavily guarded communications center, where both human and Celestian security personnel monitored interplanetary transmissions. Grand Sovereign Eli Star was already present, along with General Kellen from the human delegation. Both leaders looked grave. What's happened? Lyra asked, feeling Blake tense beside her. Her father gestured toward the central display, where a series of images showed a small research outpost on Celastra's second moon. Or rather, what remained of it. The dome structures were shattered, equipment scattered across the lunar surface. The Harmony Research Station was attacked 6 hours ago, General Kellen explained, his voice clipped. Preliminary assessment indicates it was a coordinated strike using military-grade weapons. Casualties? Blake asked, his voice taking on the flat tone Lyra now recognized as his combat mindset. 12 Celestian researchers and 8 human scientists dead, her father replied, his skin a deep indigo of mourning. 3 Celestians survived and are being transported to the medical center now. Who would do this? Lyra asked, horror washing over her. The research station had been one of the first joint projects under the peace treaty, dedicated to studying harmonious energy resonance between different technologies. That's the question, General Kellen said grimly. Both sides have extremist factions opposed to the alliance. This could be the work of either, or both, working in concert. Or a third party that benefits from renewed conflict between our peoples, Blake suggested, studying the images with analytical intensity. The attack pattern isn't consistent with either human or Celestian military doctrine. Grand Sovereign Eli Star turned his penetrating gaze on Blake. You recognize this from your special operations experience, Captain? I recognize what doesn't fit, Blake replied evenly. These blast patterns are too precise for a typical raiding party, but too destructive for a covert operation. It's almost as if whoever did this wanted it to be obvious an attack occurred, but not who was responsible. Regardless of who is behind it, this is a direct challenge to the peace we've established, Lyra stated. We must respond with unity, not suspicion. Agreed, her father said, though Lyra could detect reservation in his tone. Which is why the Council has decided that you two, as the living embodiment of our alliance, should travel to the medical center and speak with the survivors. Your presence will reassure our peoples that we stand together in the face of this provocation. When do we leave? Blake asked, already shifting into planning mode. Immediately, General Kellen answered. A joint security team has been assembled. The medical transport will reach the capital within the hour, and we want you there when the survivors arrive. As they left the communication center to prepare for the journey, Lyra noticed the subtle changes in Blake's demeanor. Gone was the thoughtful diplomat she had come to know over the past months. In his place stood a soldier, alert, focused, and radiating a contained danger she had only glimpsed during the assassination attempt. You've done this before, she said softly as they walked briskly toward their quarters to gather what they would need. Responded to attacks, interviewed survivors. Blake glanced at her, his expression unreadable. Yes. There's more to your military background than you've shared, isn't there? He stopped walking and turned to face her fully, his voice low enough that only she could hear. Lyra, there are aspects of the war that neither side likes to acknowledge. Things I've done, things I've seen, none of which help the future we're trying to build. I'm not asking out of idle curiosity, she replied, holding his gaze steadily. If we're walking into danger, I need to know who is beside me. Not just the diplomat I've married, but the soldier as well. Something shifted in Blake's eyes, a decision being made. Fair enough. I was part of a specialized unit designated as Phantom Operators. We were deployed to high-risk situations, usually without official acknowledgement. Rescue operations, intelligence gathering, occasional direct action. You were successful, Lyra said. It wasn't a question. Very. Blake confirmed, no pride in his voice, merely stating fact. That's why I was chosen for this diplomatic assignment. My superiors believed I could protect the Alliance if necessary, while having the skills to adapt to your culture. They sent me a guardian disguised as a husband, Lyra said, a complex mixture of emotions washing through her. They sent you a soldier who wants to be a peacemaker, Blake corrected gently. I believe in this alliance, Lyra, not just as a mission, but as the right path forward. Their eyes held for a long moment, an unspoken current passing between them. Then Lyra nodded once, accepting both his words and the parts he still left unsaid. Then let us be peacemakers together, she said, while being prepared for those who want war. The medical center was a massive crystalline structure on the outskirts of the capital city, its architecture designed to harness natural healing energies that Celestrians had studied for millennia. As Blake and Lyra arrived with their security detail, the medical transport was just landing on the dedicated pad adjacent to the emergency treatment wing. Medical personnel rushed forward with hovering stretchers, their movements efficient and coordinated as they transferred the injured Celestrians from the transport. Blake observed the proceedings with a professional eye, noting the security measures and potential vulnerabilities while staying close to Lyra's side. The survivors are in critical but stable condition, explained Chief Healer Nemery as she led them toward the intensive care unit. They've suffered severe trauma, both physical and psychological. I must ask that you limit your questions and be prepared for disorientation. We understand, Lyra assured her. Our primary concern is their well-being, not intelligence gathering. The Chief Healer's skin flushed with approval. The most lucid survivor is Senior Researcher Jorin. He was in a shielded laboratory section when the attack began, which spared him the worst of the destruction. They were led to a private healing chamber where a male Celestrian lay on a specialized bed of crystalline material that pulsed with soft light. His translucent skin was marred with injuries that appeared as darkened patches against the natural blue luminescence. His eyes were closed, but they fluttered open as Lyra approached. Ambassador, he whispered, his voice barely audible. You honor us with your presence. Save your strength, Researcher Jorin, Lyra said gently, moving to stand beside his bed. We came to assure you that you are safe now, and to express our deep sorrow for what has happened to you and your colleagues. Blake positioned himself slightly behind Lyra, observing but not intruding on what was primarily a moment of Celestrian mourning ritual. However, Jorin's gaze shifted to him, eyes widening slightly in recognition. The human consort, he said, his voice strengthening marginally. You should know, they spoke your language. Blake stepped forward, his attention sharpening. The attackers? They spoke English. Not English, Jorin clarified with obvious effort. Another human tongue. Harsh sounds. And they knew our security protocols, disabled them with Celestrian override codes. Lyra exchanged a significant look with Blake. This suggests collaboration between rogue elements of both our species. Or very well-informed outsiders, Blake countered, his mind racing through the implications. Researcher Jorin, did you see any of the attackers? Their appearance, their equipment? Armored, faces covered, Jorin replied, his strength clearly fading. But one thing, strange emblem, like a shattered crystal with a blade through it. Chief Healer Nemery stepped forward. Enough. He needs rest now. You can continue this tomorrow if his condition improves. Lyra nodded respectfully. Of course. Thank you, Researcher Jorin. Your courage honors your colleague's memory. As they left the healing chamber, Blake's mind was already analyzing the limited information they'd received. The emblem Jorin described wasn't associated with any known human extremist group, nor did it match Celestrian separatist symbolism from their intelligence briefings. We need to cross-reference this emblem against both human and Celestrian databases, he told Lyra as they walked toward the medical center's secure communication room, and investigate how the attackers obtained Celestrian security protocols. My father will want a full report, Lyra said, her expression troubled. As will your General Kellen. Blake nodded, though his instincts were telling him something wasn't adding up. The attack was too perfectly orchestrated, the evidence too conveniently ambiguous. Before he could voice these concerns, however, a tremendous explosion rocked the medical center. The blast came from the direction of the landing pad they had used less than an hour before. Alarms immediately blared throughout the facility, with emergency lighting switching to crisis mode. Blake's training kicked in instantly. He grabbed Lyra's arm, pulling her away from the large crystal windows that could shatter into deadly shards. "Stay down," he ordered, scanning their surroundings for immediate threats. Their security detail was rushing toward them, weapons drawn. "Ambassador," "Captain," called the Celestrian security chief, Valier. "We must get you to safety immediately. The medical center is under attack." Blake's mind rapidly assessed the situation. How many attackers? What's their position? "Unknown," Valier replied tersely. Perimeter sensors detected multiple breaches before they went offline. Communications are being jammed. A second explosion, closer than the first, sent tremors through the building's crystalline structure. Blake heard the distinctive sound of weapons fire. Energy pulses mixed with the sharper reports of projectile weapons. The attack pattern was familiar to him. Simultaneous assaults from multiple entry points, communications disruption, followed by a sweeping clear operation. "This is a professional strike team," he told the security chief. "They'll have the exits covered. We need an alternative route." Lyra, who had maintained her composure despite the chaos, turned to Valier. "The medical center has emergency evacuation tunnels for patients. Access point Theta is 2 levels below us." Blake was impressed but not surprised by her quick thinking. Over their months together, he had learned that Lyra's diplomatic grace was matched by a sharp tactical mind. "Lead the way," he said to Valier. "Defensive formation. Priority is the ambassador's safety." As they moved quickly through the corridors, helping evacuate medical staff and patients they encountered, Blake heard the fighting intensify behind them. The attackers were moving methodically through the medical center, clearly searching for something or someone. They had almost reached the service lift that would take them to the tunnel level when a new explosion tore through the wall directly ahead of them. The blast knocked several security personnel off their feet and sent crystal shards flying in all directions. Through the smoke and debris emerged 5 armored figures, faces concealed behind tactical masks, weapons raised. Blake recognized their formation immediately, standard breach and clear tactics. Without hesitation, he pushed Lyra behind him and moved forward to engage. What happened next would forever change how Lyra saw her human husband. Blake Turner transformed before her eyes. The thoughtful, measured diplomat vanished, replaced by a warrior of terrifying efficiency. He closed the distance to the first attacker before the man could properly aim his weapon, deflecting the barrel upward with one hand while delivering a precise strike to the throat with the other. As the first attacker fell gasping, Blake was already moving to the second, using the dying man's momentum to pull his weapon free and turn it on his companions. 3 shots, 3 hits, each finding a vulnerable joint in the attacker's armor where maximum damage could be inflicted with minimum force. The fourth attacker managed to fire a burst that Blake somehow anticipated, twisting his body to avoid the energy pulses while returning fire with unerring accuracy. The fifth attacker, seeing his comrades fall in less than 10 seconds, attempted to retreat through the hole they had blasted. Blake smoothly transitioned from the projectile weapon, now empty, to a fallen Celestrian guard's energy pistol, taking the final attacker down with a shot that caught him squarely between the shoulder blades. The entire engagement had lasted perhaps 15 seconds. 5 trained soldiers lay dead or incapacitated, and Blake stood in the center of the destruction, his breathing elevated but controlled, his movements still fluid as he scanned for additional threats. Lyra stared at him in shock. The human she had married, the man who carefully tended the crystal flowers in their quarters and spent hours discussing philosophical texts with her, had just eliminated 5 armed combatants with the casual efficiency of someone completing a routine task. "Lyra," Blake called, his voice cutting through her stunned paralysis. "We need to move. There will be more." He was right. Already they could hear additional forces converging on their position. The surviving members of their security detail regrouped around them, now looking at Blake with a mixture of awe and wariness. "This way," Valier directed, leading them down a side corridor that had escaped the worst of the damage. As they hurried toward an alternative route to the evacuation tunnels, Lyra found herself studying Blake with new eyes. His movements were different now, precise, economical, constantly scanning their surroundings. His eyes had changed too, taking on a focused intensity that missed nothing. "You're not just a special operator," she said quietly as they paused at a security checkpoint. "What were you really?" Blake glanced at her, something like regret flickering across his features. "Later," he promised. "Right now, we need to get you to safety." The evacuation tunnel was a marvel of Celestrian engineering, a translucent crystalline tube that ran beneath the medical center to a secure bunker half a kilometer away. Emergency lighting pulsed along its length, guiding evacuees towards safety. Medical staff were already helping injured patients through the tunnel when Blake, Lyra, and what remained of their security detail arrived. "Ambassador," greeted Chief Healer Nemery, her skin a troubled gray with stress. "We've moved the survivors from the moon base ahead of us. They should already be secure in the bunker." "Any word on who's attacking?" Blake asked, helping a wounded Celestrian guard onto a hovering stretcher. "None," Nemery replied. "But they're specifically targeting the communication center and patient records. This isn't random violence." Blake exchanged a significant look with Lyra. "They're after information, possibly about what the moon base survivors witnessed." "Then we must ensure the survivors reach the secure bunker," Lyra decided. "Chief Healer, please continue the evacuation. We'll proceed ahead to confirm the security of the bunker." As they moved through the crystal tunnel, the sounds of conflict above became increasingly muffled. Blake maintained a vigilant watch, still carrying the energy pistol he had appropriated during the fight. The remaining security personnel, 3 Celestrians and 2 humans, formed a protective formation around Lyra. "Something's wrong," Blake said suddenly, holding up his hand to halt their progress. "The emergency lighting ahead is out." Valier activated his communicator, attempting to contact the bunker security team. No response from the advance team, he reported grimly. "Trap," Blake stated flatly. "They knew about the evacuation protocol and got ahead of us." He turned to Lyra. "We need an alternative exit point." "There's a maintenance access halfway down the tunnel," she replied without hesitation. "It leads to the surface near the crystal forest." Blake nodded approvingly. "Valor, take half the team and continue forward. Make noise. Make it look like we're still heading for the bunker. The rest of us will exit through the maintenance access and circle back to the city through the forest." The security chief understood immediately. "A diversion. Good strategy, Captain." As Valier and 2 guards continued down the main tunnel, Blake, Lyra, and the remaining 2 security personnel, 1 human and 1 Celestrian, located the maintenance access. The narrow crystal ladder led upward to a hatch that opened into a small service building at the edge of the renowned crystal forest, a natural wonder of Celastra, where crystal formations grew like trees, reaching hundreds of meters into the sky. The forest was eerily beautiful in the moonlight, the twin moons casting double shadows through the towering crystal structures. The transparent trees refracted and reflected the moonlight, creating a dazzling display of light and color that would have been breathtaking under other circumstances. "The forest provides good cover from aerial surveillance," Lyra explained as they moved carefully between the massive crystal formations. "And the natural resonance disrupts most scanning technology." "Smart," Blake commented, his professional assessment evident in his tone. "Which direction to the city?" "Northwest," Lyra replied, oriented despite the disorienting beauty of the forest. "There's a Sovereign Guard outpost about 3 kilometers from here." They moved as quickly as caution allowed, Blake taking point while the security personnel guarded their flanks and rear. Lyra stayed in the center of their formation, though Blake noted she moved with surprising confidence through the difficult terrain. They had covered perhaps a kilometer when the Celestrian guard suddenly stiffened, his skin flashing warning patterns of dark purple. "Movement ahead," he whispered. "Multiple signatures." Blake signaled for everyone to take cover behind the wider crystal formations. He crept forward alone, using the natural camouflage provided by the reflective surfaces to approach the potential threat. What he saw made his blood run cold. A full squadron of armored figures was systematically moving through the forest in a search pattern. Their armor was neither standard human nor Celestian military issue, but a hybrid design that incorporated elements of both. Each soldier bore the emblem researcher Jaren had described, a shattered crystal with a blade through it. Blake retreated silently to where Lyra and the others waited. At least 12 hostiles between us and the city, he reported in a hushed voice. Well-equipped, moving in a professional search grid. We can't go forward. The forest extends for hundreds of kilometers in the eastern direction, Lyra said thoughtfully. But there's an ancient temple complex about 5 kilometers south. It was built with materials that naturally block electromagnetic signals. The priests valued their privacy. We might find communication equipment there, or at least shelter until rescue forces can locate us. Blake weighed their options quickly. With limited weapons, 2 security personnel, and Lyra to protect, engaging a superior force was out of the question. Heading deeper into the wilderness risked exposure to Celastra's more dangerous natural phenomena. The temple seemed their best option. South it is, he decided. But we need to move fast and quiet. They'll expand their search pattern when they don't find us on the main routes. As they changed direction, Blake fell into step beside Lyra. Despite the danger, she showed no signs of panic, moving with purpose and maintaining her composure. He had always respected her diplomatic skills, but seeing her calm effectiveness in a crisis added a new dimension to his appreciation. You're doing well, he told her quietly as they navigated a particularly dense cluster of crystal formations. I underwent crisis training as part of my diplomatic preparation, Lyra explained. Though I admit, the practical application is quite different from the simulations. A ghost of a smile touched Blake's lips. Always is. They traveled in silence after that, conserving energy and minimizing the chance of detection. The crystal forest grew denser as they moved south, the formations larger and more complex. Strange bioluminescent organisms clung to some of the crystals, providing just enough light to navigate by when the moons were obscured by the larger structures. After nearly 2 hours of careful progress, they began to see signs of ancient construction. Perfectly geometrical crystal platforms and deliberately shaped pathways that stood distinct from the natural formations around them. The temple complex gradually emerged from the forest, a series of concentric crystal domes and spires that seemed to glow with an inner light. The Temple of Eternal Resonance, Lyra explained with reverence. One of our most sacred historical sites. It was built over 5,000 years ago by the ancient harmonizers. Blake scanned the structure with tactical appreciation. Defensible position, limited access points, good visibility of the surrounding area. The human security officer, Corporal Chun, checked his communications device. Still no signal. Whatever they're using to jam communications has a hell of a range. The temple's natural shielding might actually help us, the Celestian Guard, Sentinel Noros, suggested. If we can get inside, we might be able to use the ancient acoustic communication system to send a message to the capital. Blake raised an eyebrow at this. Acoustic system? Before electronic communication, our ancestors developed a network of crystal resonators that could transmit vibrations over vast distances, Lyra explained. The main node is still maintained in the capital as a historical artifact. If we can activate the temple's transmitter, someone might hear us. Worth a shot, Blake decided. Let's move in, but carefully. This would make an obvious fallback position, and our friends back there didn't strike me as amateurs. They approached the temple complex from the eastern side, using the deeper shadows cast by the larger dome. The entrance was a tall archway of intricately carved crystal, leading to a vast circular chamber. Inside, the air was noticeably different, cooler and charged with a subtle energy that made the fine hairs on Blake's arms stand on end. The main chamber was dominated by a massive central crystal that rose from floor to ceiling, at least 30 meters in height. Smaller crystals of varying sizes and colors radiated outward from this central pillar in a spiral pattern. The entire structure seemed to pulse with subtle light, as if responding to their presence. The harmonic core, Lyra said with appropriate awe. Legend says it's connected to the planetary consciousness itself. Blake remained focused on their immediate situation. Corporal Chun, Sentinel Noros, secure the perimeter and establish a watch rotation. We need early warning if anyone approaches. He turned to Lyra. How does this communication system work? Lyra approached the central crystal, her movements taking on a formal, almost ritualistic quality that Blake had observed during Celestian ceremonies. The transmitter requires activation by one with the proper resonant frequency, typically a trained priest. But as a member of the sovereign lineage, I should be able to initiate a basic connection. She placed her four-fingered hands against the crystal surface and closed her eyes in concentration. The luminescence within the crystal intensified where she touched it, pulsing in rhythm with what Blake realized was her heartbeat. A low humming filled the chamber, gradually increasing in pitch and complexity until it became a haunting melody that seemed to emanate from the very air around them. I've established connection, Lyra said, her voice taking on a strange, echoing quality. But the signal is weak. The system hasn't been fully activated in centuries. Blake watched in fascination as her translucent skin began to glow more brightly, patterns of light flowing through her that mirrored the pulses in the crystal. This was a side of Celestian biology and culture that few humans had ever witnessed, the deep connection between the crystalline planet and its native inhabitants. Can you send a message? He asked. Yes, Lyra replied, her eyes still closed in concentration. But only simple patterns that trained listeners would recognize as deliberate rather than natural crystal harmonics. Emergency distress pattern, Blake suggested. Location identifier if possible. Lyra nodded slightly, the glow of her skin intensifying as she focused her efforts. The humming melody shifted, becoming more structured, with repeating patterns that even Blake's untrained ear could recognize as deliberately formed. While Lyra worked with the crystal transmitter, Blake conducted a thorough assessment of their temporary sanctuary. The temple complex contained multiple chambers, connected by archways and spiral passages. Most were empty of anything but dust and smaller crystal formations that had grown naturally over the centuries. But one room contained ancient artifacts that might prove useful: ceremonial tools, preserved texts on crystalline tablets, and what appeared to be water storage vessels still filled with liquid that glowed with a faint blue luminescence. He returned to the main chamber, just as Lyra was withdrawing her hands from the central crystal. She looked exhausted, her normally bright skin dimmed to a pale glow. Message sent, she reported, swaying slightly. Simple distress signal with the temple's location signature. If anyone is monitoring the old frequencies in the capital, they'll hear it. Blake moved quickly to support her as she stumbled, guiding her to sit on a low crystal bench near the wall. You've done well, he told her, genuine respect in his voice. Rest now. Corporal Chen entered the chamber, her expression tense. Captain, we've got movement in the forest. Multiple signatures approaching from the north. Blake's mind shifted immediately back to combat mode. How many and how far? At least 8 that we can see through the crystal refractions. Maybe half a kilometer out and moving deliberately. They're searching, not rushing in. They must have tracked us somehow, Blake muttered, his mind racing through possibilities and options. Sentinel Noros, what's our weapons situation? 2 energy pistols, one with charge at 70%, one at 40%. The Celestian Guard reported crisply. Plus whatever you took from the attackers earlier. Blake had managed to retain the energy pistol from the medical center, but its charge was unknown and likely depleted after the earlier firefight. Not enough firepower to repel a determined assault by superior numbers. We need to use the temple to our advantage, he decided. Corporal, Sentinel, begin setting up defensive positions in the inner chambers. Use the crystal formations for cover. If they breach the main entrance, we'll fall back in stages, drawing them deeper where their numbers won't give them as much advantage. As the security personnel moved to follow his orders, Blake turned back to Lyra, who was watching him with an unreadable expression. You've done this before, she said softly. Defended an impossible position against superior forces. Blake met her gaze steadily. Yes, and lived to tell about it. Sometimes, he acknowledged, a shadow crossing his features. Not everyone under my command was always so fortunate. Lyra reached out, her four-fingered hand resting lightly on his arm, a gesture of comfort that had become natural between them over the months of their marriage. I trust you, Blake Turner. The simple declaration hit Blake with unexpected force. Trust was not something freely given in his line of work, nor in diplomatic arrangements like their marriage. Yet here, in the face of imminent danger, Lyra was offering him something genuine. "We're going to get through this," he promised her, covering her hand with his own. "And when we do, I think it's time I told you the full truth about who I was before I became your husband." A small smile touched her lips. "I look forward to it." Their moment of connection was interrupted by Sentinel Noros returning with urgent news. "Captain, they've surrounded the temple complex. I count at least 15 hostiles, possibly more obscured by the crystal formations." Blake's expression hardened as he switched back to combat mode. "Have they attempted to breach the entrance?" "Not yet. They appear to be establishing a perimeter. Standard containment protocol. They're waiting for something," Blake concluded grimly. "Or someone." As if in answer to his assessment, a new sound penetrated the temple's walls, the distinctive hum of a transport vessel landing nearby. Blake exchanged a significant look with Lyra. "Reinforcements," he said, "or leadership coming to oversee the operation personally. Either way, our situation has become more complicated," Lyra observed with remarkable calm. "What's our strategy?" Blake admired her poise. Despite having no combat training, she was thinking clearly and focusing on solutions rather than giving in to fear. It reinforced what he had come to appreciate about her over their months together, her innate strength and adaptability. "We need to know what we're dealing with," he decided. "The temple has windows or observation points." "Yes, in the upper levels of the main dome," Lyra confirmed. "There's a meditation balcony that overlooks the eastern approach." "Perfect. Sentinel Noros, continue fortifying our fallback positions. Corporal Chun, stay with the ambassador. I'm going to get a visual on our visitors." Blake moved swiftly through the temple, following Lyra's directions to the upper levels. The spiral staircase was carved from a single massive crystal, its steps worn smooth by thousands of years of use. At the top, he found the meditation balcony, a semicircular platform with a low balustrade that provided an excellent view of the surrounding forest and the temple's eastern approach. Staying low and in the shadows, Blake peered over the edge. The scene below confirmed his worst suspicions. A sleek transport vessel had landed in a small clearing about 200 meters from the temple. Its design was unfamiliar, neither human nor Celestian standard, but incorporating elements of both technologies. Around it, armored soldiers had established a secure perimeter, their weapons trained on the temple. But what caught Blake's attention was the figure emerging from the transport. Unlike the soldiers, this individual wore no helmet, revealing a face that sent a cold shock of recognition through Blake's system. The man below had the angular features and silver-tinted skin of a Celestian, but modified with technological implants that gave him an unsettling hybrid appearance. Even from this distance, Blake could see that one eye had been replaced with a cybernetic enhancement that glowed with an unnatural red light. "Vexer," Blake whispered, the name tasting bitter on his tongue. He had never expected to see that face again, a face from the darkest chapter of the human-Celestian conflict, a name spoken only in classified briefings and nightmare accounts from the few survivors of his attacks. General Vexer Thandes had been a brilliant Celestian military commander who had disappeared 3 years into the war, presumed killed during a human strike on a Celestian military installation. Apparently, those presumptions had been gravely mistaken. Blake retreated from the balcony and made his way quickly back to the main chamber, his mind racing with implications and revising strategies. If Vexer was involved, their situation was far more dangerous than a simple extremist attack. "We have a problem," he announced as he rejoined the others. "The leader of the attack force is General Vexer Thandes." The effect of the name on Lyra and Sentinel Noros was immediate and profound. The Celestian guard's skin paled to an almost white translucence, while Lyra's eyes widened in shock. "That's impossible," she stated. "Vexer Thandes was declared dead 3 years ago. My father confirmed it personally." "Well, he looks remarkably alive for a dead man," Blake replied grimly. "And he's undergone significant modifications, cybernetic implants, including weapons systems integrated directly into his body." Corporal Chin looked confused. "I'm not familiar with this individual." "Significance. General Vexer Thandes was the architect of the Shattered Moon Massacre," Sentinel Noros explained, his voice hollow with remembered horror. He ordered the destruction of the human research colony on Titan, killing over 6,000 civilians. After that, he went rogue, defying even the Celestian High Command's orders. His own government disavowed him. What most don't know, Blake added, is that before he disappeared, intelligence suggested he was working on forming a splinter faction from both sides, humans and Celestians who believed neither government was pursuing the war aggressively enough. He called them the Crystal Blade. Lyra's gaze snapped to his. The shattered crystal with a blade through it. The emblem the moon base survivor described. Blake nodded grimly. Vexer must have succeeded in building his organization in secret while everyone thought he was dead. And now he's making his move, attacking symbols of peace between our peoples to reignite the conflict. But why target us specifically? Lyra questioned. There are more high-profile targets that would create greater impact. Blake's expression darkened. Because you're the daughter of the Celestian leader, and I'm. He hesitated, then committed to the truth. I'm the man who was sent to kill him 3 years ago. Silence fell over the chamber as the implications of his words sank in. Lyra stared at him, the glow of her skin fluctuating with emotion. You were the assassin, she said finally, her voice unnaturally calm. The one who led the strike on his command center. Blake met her gaze steadily. Yes, it was a classified operation, approved at the highest levels of human military command. Vexer had crossed too many lines, become too dangerous even for a war situation. My team infiltrated his base, confirmed what we believed was a kill, and extracted with heavy casualties. But he survived, Corporal Chen concluded. And now he wants revenge, Sentinel Noros added grimly. Against both the human who tried to kill him and the Celestian leadership that disavowed him. This isn't just about revenge, Blake corrected. Vexer is too strategic for simple retribution. This is about destroying the peace treaty before it can take root. Our marriage is the public face of that treaty, the symbol of cooperation between our species. If he kills us, especially here on Celastra, it will reignite all the old hatreds and suspicions. Lyra absorbed this information with remarkable composure, though Blake could see the turmoil beneath her controlled exterior. He had just admitted to attempting to assassinate a Celestian general, one who, despite his war crimes, had once been respected by her people. It was yet another reminder of the blood-soaked history between their species that their marriage was supposed to help overcome. You should have told me, she said finally. I was under orders not to reveal my involvement in classified operations, Blake replied, though the excuse sounded hollow even to his own ears. And later, I didn't want that part of my past to interfere with what we were building. A complex expression crossed Lyra's features. What exactly were we building, Blake? A diplomatic facade or something real? The question hit him with unexpected force. Despite the dire circumstances, or perhaps because of them, Blake found himself confronting feelings he had been carefully managing for months. It started as a mission, he admitted, but somewhere along the way, it became something I valued for its own sake. Working with you, learning from you. It matters to me, Lyra. You matter. The intensity in his green eyes as he spoke conveyed more than his careful words, and Lyra's skin flushed with a soft pink luminescence that Blake had come to recognize as a sign of emotional response. Their moment of truth was interrupted by an amplified voice echoing through the temple, a voice speaking in flawless Celestian with a confidence that bordered on arrogance. Ambassador Nessari, Captain Turner, called General Vexer Thandes, the sound carrying easily through the crystal structures. I know you can hear me. I must congratulate you on your resourcefulness in evading my forces this far. Most impressive, though ultimately futile. Blake signaled for everyone to remain silent, trying to determine if Vexer was using some form of detection technology or merely baiting them to reveal their position within the temple. I have no desire for a prolonged siege, Vexer continued. So I offer you a choice. Surrender yourselves to me, and I will allow your companions to live. Resist, and I will be forced to use methods that will leave this sacred temple in ruins, along with everyone inside it. He's bluffing, Corporal Chen whispered. Even Vexer wouldn't desecrate an ancient Celestian holy site. Don't be so certain, Sentinel Noros countered. The general was always known for his ruthless pragmatism. If he believes the political value of killing the ambassador and captain outweighs the sacrilege, he won't hesitate. Blake considered their options. Their limited weapons and defensive position might allow them to hold out for a time, but without reinforcements, the outcome was inevitable. The distress signal Lyra had sent might bring help, but there was no guarantee anyone had received it or could respond quickly enough. "Ambassador," Vexer called again, his tone taking on a sharper edge. "Perhaps you need motivation. Allow me to demonstrate my resolve." A loud explosion shook the temple as something impacted one of the smaller outer structures. Crystal shards rained down in adjacent chambers, the sound of cracking and shattering echoing throughout the complex. "That was merely a fraction of the firepower at my disposal," Vexer announced. "The next target will be the southern dome. You have 5 minutes to emerge from the main entrance, unarmed and with hands visible. After that, I will systematically destroy this temple and everyone in it." Blake turned to the others, his mind racing through scenarios and outcomes. He's serious, and he has the firepower to back up his threat. "We cannot allow him to destroy the temple," Lyra said with quiet determination. "This site has stood for 5,000 years, a testament to Celestrian spiritual history. Its loss would be devastating to our cultural heritage. More importantly," Blake added, thinking tactically, "if we're killed here, especially in a manner that destroys a Celestrian holy site, it will be exactly the provocation Vexer wants. The peace treaty would collapse overnight." "What are you suggesting, Captain?" Sentinel Noros asked, though his tone suggested he already anticipated the answer. Blake met Lyra's eyes. "I go out alone. I'm the one Vexer truly wants, the man who nearly killed him, the human soldier who became a peace diplomat. You and the others remain hidden in the temple's inner chambers." "Absolutely not," Lyra stated firmly, her diplomatic reserve giving way to genuine emotion. "He wants both of us. The Celestrian who betrayed her heritage by marrying a human, and the human who tried to assassinate him. The symbolism of killing us together is what he seeks." "She's right, sir," Corporal Chun agreed reluctantly. "From a propaganda perspective, killing you alone doesn't achieve his objective. He needs to destroy the alliance you represent together." Blake knew they were correct, but the thought of leading Lyra directly into danger went against every protective instinct he had developed, both as a soldier and, more surprisingly to him, as a husband. Over the months of their arranged marriage, what had begun as a duty to protect a valuable diplomatic asset had evolved into something much more personal. "There may be a third option," Lyra said suddenly, her eyes lighting with inspiration. "The temple's lower levels connect to the ancient crystal caverns. They're part of a vast network that extends throughout this region. If we can reach them, we might find another way out." "The enemy will have the temple surrounded," Blake pointed out. "Even if we escape through these caverns, they'll detect us as soon as we emerge." "Not necessarily," Sentinel Noros interjected. "The crystal caverns naturally disrupt most scanning technology, and they lead to the sacred pool, a site with properties that might help us contact the capital directly, more effectively than the acoustic system the ambassador already used." A new plan began to form in Blake's mind. "How much time do we need to reach these caverns?" "The entrance is in the ceremonial chamber, 2 levels below us," Lyra explained. "We could reach it in minutes." "But Vexer's deadline is in less than 4 minutes now," Corporal Chin pointed out. Blake made his decision. "I'll buy you time. I'll go out and engage with Vexer, keep him talking. The rest of you get to the caverns and make for this sacred pool. If you can establish communication with the capital, do it. If not, at least you'll have a better chance of evading capture." "I'm not leaving you to face him alone," Lyra stated, her tone brooking no argument. "That's not open for discussion." Blake recognized the determination in her voice, the same quiet strength he had come to admire during their time together. He also knew that logistically, Vexer would be suspicious if only one of them appeared. "Then we both go," he conceded. "Corporal Chun, Sentinel Noros, you proceed to the caverns. If we don't follow within 15 minutes, continue without us." "Sir," Corporal Chun began to object. "That's an order, Corporal," Blake cut her off. "The mission priority is ensuring that Vexer doesn't succeed in destroying the peace treaty. If Lyra and I are captured or killed, you must survive to report what happened here." The security officers reluctantly agreed, recognizing the strategic logic of his command. Blake turned back to Lyra, studying her face as if committing it to memory. "You understand what we're walking into," he said softly. "Vexor may want to capture us for propaganda purposes, but he will kill us eventually." "I understand," Lyra replied, her voice steady. "But you forget, Blake Turner, that while you were training to be a soldier, I was training to be a diplomat. Sometimes words can be weapons too." A smile touched Blake's lips, genuine despite the dire circumstances. "Then let's use every weapon we have." Together, they made their way toward the temple's main entrance while Corporal Chun and Sentinel Norose slipped away toward the passage to the lower levels. As they approached the massive crystal doors, Blake spoke in a low voice. "Follow my lead, but if things go wrong, look for an opening to run. The temple has multiple exits. Find one and get to the caverns." "I won't abandon you," Lyra replied, her tone making it clear this wasn't a negotiable point. Blake wanted to argue, to insist that her survival was more important than his, but he recognized the futility. In the months they had spent together, he had learned that beneath Lyra's diplomatic composure lay a will of pure crystal, beautiful but unbreakable once set. Together, then, he conceded as they reached the entrance. With a shared look of resolve, Blake pushed open one of the massive crystal doors, and they stepped out onto the temple's entrance platform. The early morning light had begun to filter through the crystal forest, creating prismatic rainbows that danced across the clearing. In another context, it would have been breathtakingly beautiful. General Vexor Thandes stood 20 meters away, flanked by 6 heavily armed soldiers. The general's appearance was even more disturbing up close, his naturally translucent Celestrian skin marred by cybernetic implants that pulsed with red energy. His left eye had been replaced entirely by a mechanical apparatus that whirred softly as it focused on them. "Ambassador Nessari, Captain Turner," Vexor greeted them, his voice carrying a metallic undertone that hadn't been present in the recordings Blake had studied before his assassination mission years ago. "How gracious of you to accept my invitation. We came to prevent the desecration of a sacred site," Lyra replied with diplomatic precision. "Not out of fear of you, General Thandes." Vexor's mouth curved in what might have been a smile on a face less disfigured by technology. "Always the diplomat, Ambassador. Your father must be so proud, seeing his daughter sacrifice herself for a pile of old crystals." Blake studied their surroundings while keeping his attention seemingly focused on Vexor. The general's forces had established a tight perimeter, with armed soldiers visible at regular intervals around the temple grounds. The transport vessel he had arrived in was positioned for a quick departure, its engines still in standby mode. "You won't succeed," Blake stated flatly. "Whatever you're planning, it won't reignite the war. Both governments are committed to peace." Vexor turned his unsettling gaze to Blake, the mechanical eye worrying as it adjusted. "Captain Turner, the legendary Phantom operator who nearly killed me. I've looked forward to meeting you properly." He gestured to his cybernetic enhancements. "You forced me to make certain improvements after our last encounter. I should thank you." "The improvements don't seem to have fixed your judgment," Blake replied evenly. "Attacking peace envoys and historical sites isn't going to win you any supporters, even among those who oppose the treaty." "You understand so little," Vexor said, his tone almost pitying. "This isn't about winning supporters or influencing policy. This is about truth. The fundamental, inescapable truth that humans and Celestrians cannot coexist. One species must ultimately dominate. Evolution demands it." "That's not truth," Lyra countered. "That's fear masquerading as destiny. Our species have different strengths, different perspectives. Together, we are more than the sum of our parts." Vexor laughed, a harsh sound that echoed strangely through his modified vocal apparatus. "Pretty words, Ambassador. Your diplomatic training serves you well. But words cannot change biological reality. Your marriage is a lie, a political convenience that both sides will abandon at the first crisis." Blake felt a surge of unexpected anger at Vexor's dismissal. "You're wrong," he said, his voice low but intense. "What began as a political arrangement has become something more genuine, something that proves your entire philosophy is flawed." Lyra glanced at him, surprise evident in her expression. Blake hadn't intended to make such a personal declaration, but faced with Vexor's sneering certainty, the truth had emerged unplanned. Vexor studied them both, his organic eye narrowing while his mechanical one continued its constant adjustments. How touching. The assassin has developed feelings for his target's daughter. Is that why you took this assignment, Captain? Guilt over the lives you ended during the war. I took this assignment because I believed in the possibility of peace, Blake replied truthfully. Something you once believed in yourself, before you became obsessed with proving your own superiority. A flash of genuine anger crossed Vexor's face, his skin darkening to a dangerous shade of red. You know nothing of my beliefs. I have seen the future, Captain Turner. I have calculated the probabilities. Coexistence is a temporary state that inevitably leads to domination or extinction. I am merely accelerating the inevitable. By becoming neither fully Celestrian nor human, Lyra observed, gesturing to his cybernetic enhancements. You've made yourself a hybrid of the very species you claim cannot coexist. It was a perceptive point, and Blake could see it struck home. Vexor's organic eye twitched slightly, a tell that suggested Lyra had touched on a sensitive contradiction in his worldview. Technology is neutral, Vexor replied after a moment. It serves whoever masters it. I have simply taken the best tools available to achieve my purpose. Which is what exactly? Blake pressed, trying to keep Vexor talking while hoping Corporal Chun and Sentinel Noros had made progress toward the caverns. Destroying the peace treaty won't immediately restart the war. Both governments are tired of conflict. Governments respond to public opinion, Vexor said, a hint of smugness entering his tone. And public opinion is easily manipulated with the right catalyst. Imagine the reaction when news spreads that the symbol of peace between our peoples, the famous diplomatic couple, has been brutally murdered by Celestrian separatists, or perhaps by human extremists. The evidence can be arranged either way. Blake felt a chill as he realized the full extent of Vexor's plan. You're going to frame whichever side gives you the most advantage. Precisely, Vexor confirmed, though I'm leaning toward blaming humans. The destruction of an ancient Celestrian temple will particularly inflame Celestrian public opinion. Your people will be seen as barbarians who cannot respect even our most sacred sites. And when war resumes, Lyra continued the logic. Your Crystal Blade forces will be positioned to take advantage of the chaos. We will offer a third path, Vexor agreed. A new order that recognizes the truth of species hierarchy, with those who understand this reality, regardless of their original species, at the top. As Vexor spoke, Blake noticed subtle movement in the crystal forest beyond the perimeter. Something, or someone, was moving through the trees with deliberate care. Reinforcements, perhaps? He kept his expression neutral, not wanting to alert Vexor or his guards. Your truth is just another justification for power, Blake said, deliberately engaging Vexor to keep his attention. Dictators have used similar arguments throughout human history. None of them lasted. History is written by survivors, Captain Turner, Vexor replied coldly. And I intend to survive. More than that, I intend to thrive in the new order that emerges from this conflict. As he spoke those words, Vexor made a subtle gesture to his guards. Two of them stepped forward, raising weapons that Blake recognized as neural disruptors, designed to incapacitate without killing, commonly used for high-value prisoner capture. I believe our conversation has reached its natural conclusion, Vexor stated. You will now accompany us to my facility, where you will record certain statements before your public execution. The manner of your deaths will be appropriately dramatic to achieve maximum impact. Blake tensed, preparing for a final, likely futile resistance. He had no illusions about their chances against Vexor's forces, but he would not go quietly. Beside him, Lyra stood tall, her dignity undiminished by their dire situation. Just as the guards were about to fire their neural disruptors, a brilliant flash of light erupted from the crystal forest to the west. The massive crystal trees suddenly pulsed with energy, creating a cascading wave of light that momentarily blinded everyone in the clearing. Even Blake, who had been partially shielded by the temple entrance, found himself blinking away spots from his vision. The momentary confusion was followed by the distinctive sound of energy weapons firing. Several of Vexor's perimeter guards fell before they could locate the source of the attack. From multiple directions, armored figures emerged from the crystal forest, their uniforms bearing the insignia of the Celestian Sovereign Guard. Defensive positions. Vexor shouted, his cybernetic eye adjusting faster than his organic one to the changing light conditions. He raised his arm, which transformed with mechanical precision into an integrated weapon system, and fired a burst of energy toward the approaching Sovereign Guards. Blake seized the opportunity. In one fluid motion, he tackled Lyra back through the temple entrance, shielding her body with his as energy bolts struck the crystal archway above them. The capital received our signal, Lyra realized as they took cover behind a massive crystal column. Perfect timing, Blake replied, his eyes scanning for a weapon. He spotted a fallen guard's energy pistol and retrieved it swiftly. Outside, chaos erupted as the Sovereign Guards engaged Vexor's forces. The general himself fought with terrifying efficiency, his cybernetic enhancements giving him inhuman speed and firepower. 3 guards fell to his integrated weapons before they could even target him. He's too powerful, Lyra whispered, watching the battle unfold. Blake's eyes narrowed, tactical assessment flowing through his mind. Every system has a weakness. His cybernetics require tremendous energy. Look at the power core on his back. Without hesitation, Blake stepped into the doorway and took careful aim. The energy pistol discharged with a brilliant flash, striking Vexor's power core with pinpoint accuracy. The general stumbled as his systems flickered, momentarily vulnerable. The Sovereign Guard seized the advantage, concentrating their fire. Vexor fought desperately, but without his enhancements functioning at full capacity, he was overwhelmed. A final barrage of energy bolts struck him squarely in the chest, and the infamous general collapsed to the ground, his mechanical eye fading to darkness. Within minutes, the remaining Crystal Blade forces surrendered or retreated. The battle was over. 3 months later, Blake and Lyra stood on the balcony of their quarters in the capital, watching the twin moons rise. The peace treaty had not only survived Vexor's attempt to destroy it, but had grown stronger. The joint response of human and Celestian forces to the crisis had demonstrated the benefits of cooperation. The new research station on the moon will be completed next month, Lyra said, her hand finding Blake's. They're naming it Harmony Reborn. Blake smiled, squeezing her fingers gently. Appropriate. The Council has approved our proposal for expanded cultural exchange programs, she continued. And your government has agreed to joint security protocols. Peace has a stronger foundation now, Blake agreed. Sometimes it takes facing destruction to appreciate what you're building. Lyra turned to face him, her luminescent skin glowing softly in the moonlight. What we've built together is more than political, isn't it? Blake met her gaze, finally allowing himself to fully acknowledge what had grown between them. It always was, from the moment you taught me crystal singing. I just couldn't admit it then. And now, she asked. Now I know that what started as duty has become the most meaningful bond I've ever formed. Blake answered truthfully. I didn't just marry you for peace. I found peace in our marriage. Lyra smiled, the light patterns in her skin forming the Celestian expression of deep joy. As did I. Perhaps that's the real lesson for both our peoples. As they stood together beneath the stars, the union that began as a political strategy had transformed into something neither government had anticipated. A genuine love that transcended species, proving that understanding and connection were not just possible, but inevitable when hearts remained open to possibility. And that was the end of the story. If you listened all the way to here, don't forget to leave feedback about what you thought of the story in the comments, whether positive or negative. Your feedback helps us improve. Also leave your like and subscribe to the channel for more stories like this one. And I'll leave here on the screen another video that I'm sure you'll like. Big hug, and see you in the next story.